In 1882, the Taitoi Manor of the Athens royal family, located on the hillside in the north of Athens, covers an area of 4,500 hectares. The manor has lush forests and green grass. The quiet Taitoi Palace is the palace of the Greek royal family. In midsummer, the king's family will come here to cool off. Sitting on a wooden chair in the garden of the Taitoi Palace, Wang Lin took a nap, thinking about the experiences of these years in his mind, giving people the absurd feeling of the Arabian Nights. Wang Lin was originally a tourist who visited Athens, the capital of Greece, in the 21st century. When he was tired, he rested against a tree at the Taitoi Palace, the former site of the kingdom of Sheila. When he woke up, he found that he had turned into a baby. In the days that followed, Wang Lin gradually understood his situation, and he passed through. He is now the son of King George I of Greece. George I was the first monarch of the Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Luxembourg dynasty of Greece. After the dethronement of King Otto I of Greece in 1862, the British elected the then 18-year-old monarch. Prince George of Denmark came to Greece to be king. The ancestors of George I's mother were Anna of Bohemia and Hungary, wife of the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I, who was a descendant of the Byzantine, later nickname for Eastern Rome, Empire of the Comnenian dynasty. Through his father's ancestor, Amadeo VI, Count of Savoy, he was a descendant of the Byzantine Empire of the Paleologan dynasty. Her mother was Grand Duchess Olga Konstantinovna of Russia, and Olga Konstantinovna's grandfather was Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. In the blink of an eye, Constantine had lived in Athens for 15 years, and was already accustomed to the life here, but whenever he thought of his past experiences, he could not help but sigh at the unpredictable nature of the world. The reason why Constantine was named was at the request of the Greek people. In 1571, the last princess of the Eastern Roman Empire, Sophia Paleologe, the niece of the last emperor of Eastern Rome, Constantine XI, married the Grand Duke Ivan II of Russia. Since then, the Russian royal family has owned the Roman royal family bloodline, claiming to be the successor of the Roman Empire and calling itself the Third Roman Empire. George I succeeded to the throne, which means that Constantine had the blood of the Roman royal family, and his body was flowing with the blood of the Roman emperor. The Greeks hoped that one day, the crown prince named Constantine, the king with the blood of the Roman emperor flowing in his body, can once again rule the great city with the same name as him, Constantinople. And the city is now the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Her name is now Istanbul, the largest city in the later Republic of Turkey. Being a monarch in Europe is not as easy and comfortable as people think, especially the monarchs of small and weak countries, who often suffer from splinting. In 1830, the Greek people persevered and fought bravely and fearlessly, and finally gained independence from Ottoman Turkey, which is known as the national prison. When it comes to Greece, people's first impression is an ancient civilization with a long history, the birthplace of Western civilization, and the birthplace of democracy. The birth gave birth to philosophers. Famous scholars Aristotle, Socrates developed commerce and engaged in democracy. The city-state of Athens, Sparta, which is endowed with a strong martial spirit, and so on. However, for the Greeks of the 19th century, these things were already a very distant history. In 1881, at the strong request of the Greek people, the Berlin Conference organized by Bismarck agreed to cede Thessaly of Ottoman Turkey to the Kingdom of Greece. Greece in 1882 was a downright impoverished small country in Europe, located in the southern corner of the Balkan Peninsula, and it was inconspicuous if one did not consider history. However, the Greeks have a great ideal, which is to restore the former glory. The Greek region has been under the rule of Rome since it was conquered by the ancient Roman Empire until the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted until the Ottoman Turkish Empire destroyed the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, in 1453. Eastern Rome was heavily Hellenized in the middle and late stages, and Greek became the official language of the empire. Orthodox preaching used Greek, and the title of the emperor was no longer the Roman-style Augustus or Caesar, but the Greek Basileus, Greek title for the king. As a remnant of the Roman Empire, the Greeks were ruled by the Ottoman Empire for 300 years and finally became independent. Naturally, the Greeks with thousands of years of history, splendid civilization, and long culture have a strong desire to restore the past glory. The specific performance is to recover the territory, to recover those places where the Greeks are the majority and are still ruled by the Ottoman Empire. To recover the place still inhabited by the Greeks under foreign rule is to restore Greece to the territory of the Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Empire. This matter has become the public issue that the Greek people are most concerned about. The Greek nationalists of 1878, who proposed the land and population to realize the great ideals, they included, first, the European part of Ottoman Turkey, Thrace, has 729,000 residents. Second, Macedonia has 588,000 Greeks. Third, Epirus, with 618,000 Greeks. Fourth, Thessaly, 248,000 Greeks. Fifth, the islands in the Aegean Sea and the eastern Mediterranean Sea where Greeks live, such as Crete, Kos, Cyprus, Mytilene, etc. add up to a total of 722,000 people. Sixth, the Asian territories of Ottoman Turkey, Asia Minor has 1.188 million Greeks, Syria and Palestine have 150,000 Greeks. All of these add up to a total of 432.5 Greek knights. This is almost all the core territory of Ottoman Turkey. Thinking of this, Constantine couldn't help shaking his head and smiling bitterly. He put his hand on his forehead and tried to control his emotions. This ideal is so lofty and great. Reading www.uyugonshu.com. Inspired by this ideal, the hearts of the Greeks are floating, restless, and heartily venting their national feelings. However, as far as the gap between reality and ideal is, the suffering of the Greeks is so profound. As of 1882, the Kingdom of Greece included Thessaly, which had just been recovered, and there were only about 800,000 Greeks living on the territory. The Greek peninsula is mostly mountainous, 80% of the territory is mountainous and hilly, and only about 16% of the land is suitable for cultivation. The land is barren and the harvest of food crops is not high. Since independence, they have not even been able to provide food themselves, and they have to import food on a large scale every year. In order to survive, the ancient Greeks were forced to vigorously develop overseas trade. Because their land was not fertile, they could only plant a large number of grapes and turn them into wine. The wine and other handicrafts were exchanged for food in other regions rich in food, such as Egypt. It can be said that since ancient times, the land of Greece has been notoriously barren. Originally, the population of the Kingdom of Greece was sparse. To make matters worse, this land was not suitable for cultivation, and it had a great ideal. It's really hard. If you are a small country and develop with peace of mind, Greece may not have the chance to realize its ideals. This is an opportunity given by the background of the times, that is, the decline of the Ottoman Empire. At the end of the 19th century, Ottoman Turkey was known as the sick man of West Asia, and the Manchu and Qing dynasties in the east reflected each other. It's just that the fever of fanatical nationalism persists, and in the hearts of the Greeks, it scratches and scratches the hearts of the Greeks like cat's claws. Constantine took a deep breath, wanting to sit firmly on the throne of Greece and develop Greece. This difficulty is really the beginning of hell. Your Highness, His Majesty King George and Queen Olga are already waiting for you in the dining room, and breakfast is ready. A sudden voice from beside him interrupted Constantine, who was thinking. Looking up, it turned out that it was his personal maid who came to tell him to have dinner. Nina is 2 years older than herself. She entered the Greek royal court since she was a child, and has been dispatched to Constantine's side to serve and take care of Constantine's clothing, food, and daily life. Although she is only 2 years older than Constantine, but she is smart and sensible, and won the favor of Queen Olga. According to the Queen's wishes, sending Nina to Constantine's side was not just as simple as giving Constantine a servant. Although the royal family has a noble status and a bright appearance, there are only gains and losses. It is precisely because of the high status that everyone is the focus of attention wherever they go. No matter when and where, they must not lose the royal majesty and dignity, and there are rules in the court. Too many, and after a long time, it is easy to make people feel boring. Therefore, Queen Olga sent Nina to Constantine's side, hoping that Constantine could have a peer as a playmate and dilute the boring life of the court. I saw Nina with her hands behind her back, her body leaning forward, her face facing Constantine, her tongue sticking out of her mouth. She was wearing a black maid uniform, a white apron in front of her, and a white sanitary cap on her head. At the age of 17, she was the most beautiful girl in appearance. She was slim, petite, and fair-faced. The brown eyes are clear and bright, the nose is small and firm, and the chest rises and falls on a small scale. Dressed in an ordinary maid's attire, she looks eye-catching when she wears it. Nina, be careful that Queen Olga sees your naughty appearance and will transfer you away. Constantine stood up from the chair while teasing with Nina, and walked with Nina in the direction of the restaurant. You'd better worry about yourself. Even in the royal family, I have rarely heard of someone as expensive as you. He stared at Constantine with a worried look on his face. The thing you planned, cost so high, can it really be successful? Nina was Constantine's personal servant and the person Constantine trusted most. The two grew up together and knew each other well. No matter what they did, Constantine would not hide it from her. She knew almost everything about Constantine. It's up to people to get things done. As for whether it's successful or not, then only God knows. Do your best and obey the destiny. Constantine said lightly, but there was a look of determination in his eyes. Although the Greek royal family was born in the Danish royal family, Denmark is a country with a majority of Protestants. The royal family is Protestant. Constantine was named Duke of Sparta at birth, the heir to the Greek throne, accepted the baptism of the Orthodox Church, and is an Orthodox Church believers. This is because Greece is a country where the Orthodox Church is the state religion. In order to win the favor of the people, the future king of Greece should be united with the people and have the same belief. The Queen ordered me to summon you. From the look on her face, I'm afraid she is going to ask about it. You have to be prepared. Nina was still a little worried that Constantine would make Queen Olga lose her temper. Don't worry, Nina, I'm ready. Constantine patted Nina's back with his right hand to comfort him. While they were talking, the two were already approaching the dining room. Nina took 2 steps slowly to make herself one position behind Constantine. The relaxed expression on her face also turned into a serious and solemn expression. Constantine, who was beside him, saw this scene and wanted to laugh, but Nina patted his arm as punishment. The two walked to a European-style single-story building. In front of the red wooden gate, there were 3 stone steps rising for the first time. Constantine pushed open the door and walked in. He entered a long corridor. There were some oil paintings hanging on the walls on both sides of the corridor. The contents of the paintings were similar. For example, on a dining table covered with a white tablecloth, pottery filled with milk was placed. Placed in front of the dinner plate, which is filled with sliced and neatly stacked bread. Next to the dinner plate is a silver plate. On the silver plate is a bunch of red and round grapes like rubies, like pink peaches that exude a fragrance, and cut into pieces of watermelon with black seeds. Most of them are pictures depicting the scene of dining at the table. Every time you walk a certain distance, there will be 2 symmetrical statues on both sides of the corridor, all of which are characters from Greek legends, such as the peerless beauty Helen, and Prometheus who stole fire. After passing through the promenade, there is a spacious hall. A fluorescent crystal chandelier hangs on the top of the center of the hall. Just below the chandelier is a rectangular dining table. A middle-aged man and woman are sitting at both ends of the dining table. Luxurious, it is the parents of Constantine, the king and queen of Greece, His Majesty George I and Queen Olga. There was nothing in the empty hall except the dining table. Constantine walked towards the dining table, the shoes collided with the black and white tiles above the ground, making a harsh tap sound, which was very clear in the empty hall. The hall was so spacious that people walked around. The sound actually echoed. It is said that the reason why the restaurant was built like this is to prevent people with bad intentions from approaching. The spacious and grand hall, with the hard black and white tiles laid in the hall, will undoubtedly reveal any abnormal noise. Constantine walked to the middle of the long dining table, pulled out a high-backed chair and sat down. Your Majesty George, the beautiful Queen Olga, good morning. Constantine turned to the two of them respectively, bowing his head to greet them. Nina respectfully stood behind Constantine, her hands hanging on either side of her thighs. George stared at the newspaper in his hand, and replied without looking up, Morning, Constantine has come, let's start the meal. As soon as he finished speaking, he put down the newspaper in his hand and placed it on the white tablecloth, put his hands together, pa, and clapped his palms 3 times. As soon as the applause fell, a line of male servants dressed in tuxedos with neatly combed hair, with his left hand behind his back and his right hand dragging a plate, came to the 3 of them in an orderly manner. After placing the breakfast neatly, he bowed. After bowing, maintaining the salute state, taking a few steps back, he returned to his normal posture and exited the restaurant. Because it is breakfast, it is not complicated: a plate of sliced oatmeal bread, jam in a plate, fruit salad with a silver plate device, inside this 1 grape and 2 slices of citrus cut in half, a glass of milk served in a glass, with some caviar as a condiment for the bread. Queen Olga first put the napkin on her chest, tidied it up, took a sip of the milk, then picked up a piece of bread, spread it with jam, took a bite, swallowed it, wiped her mouth with a handkerchief, and faced Constantine. Ding said, My dear son, how is your African Congo expedition going? Hearing his mother's question, Constantine was not flustered. He picked up the handkerchief on his left and wiped his mouth, before replying, I have received the news that today, Mr. Stanley is from the team of explorers sponsored by me and His Majesty. Leader, I will come to Athens by boat today, firstly to report to us the progress of the expedition plan, and secondly to take this opportunity to rest for a while. Hearing Constantine's answer, Queen Olga insisted, Constantine, I just want to remind you that up to now, your African exploration plan has cost 4 million francs, and the return, so far, is very few: a few rare African wood carvings of limited value, log records of African expeditions, and maps hand-painted by the explorer's door. Strange artwork of indigenous Africans brought back by adventurer Stanley, along with adventure maps and diaries to curry favor with his patrons, King George and Crown Prince Constantine, to show that he is not a liar and is indeed on adventures and exploration. This is the only return on the investment of 4 million francs so far. 4 million francs is a real huge sum of money in this era. 1 franc contains 0.290322258 grams of gold, and 4 million francs add up to 1.16 tons of gold. It is not the franc that has been shrinking after the First World War. Backed by the strong national strength of France, the value of the franc before the First World War was stable, and it was one of the important currencies in international circulation. Queen Olga held the bill in her hand and swayed it to Constantine and George. King George ate breakfast attentively and relished it. He picked up a grape and put it in his mouth. The sweet and sour grape juice overflowed the corner of his mouth. Then he picked up the napkin on the table and wiped the corner of his mouth. He didn't seem to care about the conversation between the two. If you want to get huge profits, you must be willing to invest huge amounts of money, Mom. This is the basic principle of business, Constantine answered vaguely while eating jam bread. Of course I understand this truth, but I want to remind you that your plan is too risky. The risk is very high, and it is likely to lose everything. Queen Olga looked at Constantine and reminded solemnly. That is also an indispensable part of the payment to obtain huge profits, Constantine replied. In Europe at the end of the 19th century, whether in London or Paris, the public was very interested in the news of overseas expeditions recorded in the newspapers, such as the sack of the British colonial leader Robert Clive in Bangladesh during the British invasion of India. Kulwu led the army to invade Bangladesh and looted the area. Kulwu alone stole gold and silver treasures worth £230,000. He brazenly boasted to the British Parliament, "Under my feet there are rich cities, and in our hands a mighty country, and before me a treasury full of gold bars, silver ingots, pearls, and gems has been opened. I have taken them all. £200,000. Gentlemen, I still wonder why I am so polite. Whenever such news appears in the newspaper, it can be sold out and sold out." People took newspapers to the streets, taverns, or other places where there were many people, discussing a certain person's overseas heroic deeds loudly and enthusiastically, and said "what a lucky guy" in an envious tone. In fact, this kind of news that people are keen on overseas adventures to obtain gold and silver treasures is a scene that people talk about with great relish. Ever since the era of great voyages opened the world, it has already appeared, but at that time, there was no large-scale release and sale. Just newspapers. The initiators are the famous Columbus, da Gama, and other pioneers of seafaring careers and overseas adventures. When the news of Columbus' discovery of India came, the entire continent of Europe was boiling. Actually, the American continent was discovered, but Columbus insisted that he discovered India. If you are confused when you look at the map and find that there is a large island called the West Indies in the waters of Central America, then blame Columbus for making a mistake. Europeans will be wrong, they are too lazy to change. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the rise of the powerful Ottoman Turkey blocked the trade routes between the East and the West. The Ottoman Turks blocked the road and charged high taxes and tolls, making Eastern goods such as spices, peppers and chili peppers from India, silk and porcelain from East Asia more expensive, not cheap at all. The helpless Europeans can only set out towards the Western Sea, Atlantic, looking for a new route to the east. Newspaper operators are also fond of the people and are happy to publish adventure stories in the newspapers. They even go out in person and sponsor some adventurers to go on an adventure on the African continent. They have negotiated with the adventurers and want to exclusively report their adventures. As for why it was Africa and not the rest of the world, it was because at the end of the 19th century, the rest of the world had no sense of mystery. In the age of navigation that began around 1500, America, Portugal and Spain were the first to be discovered. These two founders of the first colonial empires on which the sun never sets, soon colonized South and Central America. Why was there no colonization of North America, such as the United States and Canada? The reason is that they disliked it. At that time, North America did not have as many gold and silver mines and other tropical crops as South America, such as sugarcane and cocoa. In their eyes, North America was a land of bitter cold. So the situation in America is no longer mysterious. As for Asia, it was clear by the end of the 19th century that Britain and France were in India and the Netherlands were colonizing the East Indies, Indonesia, archipelago. So at the end of the 19th century, for Europeans, there was still a foggy continent, and only the African continent remained. Africa is very close to Europe, separated only by a large bathtub like the Mediterranean Sea, but Gibraltar, Spain, and the African continent are across the sea. As early as in ancient Rome, Europeans fought wars in North Africa. But this does not mean that the African continent is easy to explore. Reading www.uuganchu. The largest desert in the world, the Sahara Desert completely separates southern Africa from North Africa. The vast expanse of desert, endless no man's land, interrupts any idea of exploring southern Africa from land. The humid, hot, and rainy tropical rainforest climate in southern Africa is very unfriendly to Europeans. Compared with cold, Europeans are actually more afraid of heat, because they can effectively resist the cold, such as using bonfires, animal fur, cotton coats, etc. to keep out the cold. But Europeans are helpless to the heat, especially in southern Africa, which is humid, hot, and rainy. Mosquitoes can easily breed malaria, dysentery, and other diseases. At the same time, southern Africa does not have the incentives of huge gold and silver mines like the Americas. Therefore, at the end of the 19th century, due to the frequent overseas voyages and the increase in global trade, the African coastal areas were clearly understood by Europeans, but the inland areas of the African continent were still large blanks on the European maps. At that time, European geography was eager to figure out a question: where is the source of the Nile River? Are the Nile and Congo rivers the same source? Funded by European monarchs, geographic research organizations, newspapers, and other institutions and individuals, adventurers have a desire to make huge profits and become rich, or driven by intense curiosity, or longing for a free wild life, or purely called by the wild. Southern Africa has become a paradise for explorers. Obviously, Constantine was also one of them. He gave a lot of money to help explorers explore southern Africa, and the person he sponsored was the adventurer Mr. Stanley. A legend who was born in England, grew up in the United States, and returned to England when he became an adult. Under the influence of the adventurous boom, he rushed to southern Africa. Seemingly dissatisfied with her husband's inattentiveness, Queen Olga turned to George and said angrily, "George, are you not going to say something?" George picked up the napkin, wiped his mouth in a hurry, and said slowly, "For Constantine, this matter, whether his plan succeeds or fails, is a rare experience, and with my own from a point of view, there is a real possibility of success, although it is unlikely." I saw that Queen Olga was very dissatisfied when she heard her husband's supportive attitude, imitating George's tone, shaking her head and said, "Whether it is success or failure, it is a rare experience, George, you are really a good father." So far, Constantine's plan has spent 4 million francs, and depending on the situation, the cost will continue to be high. You better be mentally prepared. The so-called Constantine's plan was to fund explorers to go on expeditions to Central Africa. The explorers would receive honor and money, while Constantine would get colonies. The reason for taking such a risky chess is that he was forced to help. Greece is a country that became independent from the Ottoman Empire in 1830, but the Greek peninsula is really not a suitable place for farming and development, with rolling hills and lack of resources. The theme of the 19th century was empire and conquest, wars were frequent, and the strength of a country depended on the output of coal and iron. And Greece is not only sparsely populated, but also lacks coal and iron mines. Lignite is rich in content, but it has low calorific value, large combustion dust, and high sulfur content. It is the lowest quality coal. In the 19th century, this kind of coal could only be used to generate electricity. As for iron ore, there is no iron ore in Greece at all. In the 19th century, without coal and iron, such a country could only play soy sauce and have no sense of existence. Greece was such a country. By 1882, Greece had been independent for 50 years. The industry was still in a primitive state, and the transportation was backward, resulting in closed and conservative rural areas, outdated concepts, and backward agriculture. It even cost precious foreign exchange imports every year. Food. It's fine if she can't become an industrial country, but according to Greece's resource endowment, she can't even become an agricultural country. The country's strength is weak, and it can only be allowed to be arranged by the great powers, followed by the buttocks of the great powers, acting as a younger brother. Britain and France are still the protectorate of Greece. Economic backwardness naturally leads to political chaos. The term of the prime minister elected to power is as short as a dozen days, but as long as a year or so, changing like a marquee. Due to the long-term backward and barbaric rule of the Ottoman Turks, although a constitution was formulated and universal suffrage was implemented, it was suddenly implemented. There were many drawbacks in the election process, and corruption in elections emerged one after another. Industry cannot be developed, and agriculture is not enough. In order to maintain the country, Greece could only borrow a lot of foreign debts. The foreign debts in the 19th century could not be paid in full after borrowing, so they had to be discounted. Although nominally, Greece has become independent, the policies of this country are always influenced by various imperialist countries. Britain, France, and Russia have profound influence in Greece. In fact, Greece has never been independent. In the Crimean War of 1853, Britain, France and Turkey on one side, Russia on the other side, and nearly 1 million troops fought on the coast of the Black Sea. The attention of Ottoman Turkey was almost completely attracted by the Russians, and the Turks had no time to take care of Greece. Seeing this situation, the people in Greece were furious, and the nationalists shouted to recover the country and restore its glory. It was at this moment. At that time, King Otto I was under great domestic pressure, and he was happy to take this opportunity to expand his territory, to enhance his prestige in the hearts of the Greek people, to mobilize the army, and to prepare for the war. As a result, Otto's actions aroused great dissatisfaction with Britain and France. British and French ambassadors came together, severely reprimanded King Otto, and sent a fleet to assemble in the eastern Mediterranean. Under the huge pressure of Britain and France, Otto could only compromise, but the Greek people were seriously dissatisfied, thinking that he was incompetent and weak, and Otto was deposed by the Greeks. In the original history, in the later World War, Greece staged a similar scene again, but this time the party involved was Constantine himself. When confronted with such a muddy situation in Greece, even if he was a transmigrator, Constantine was devastated for a while. The mouse is pulling the tortoise, there is nowhere to go. Once inadvertently, I heard King George say that European explorers are conducting expeditions in southern Africa, and he often sponsors some money. Constantine, who heard this, was moved. Isn't this a good opportunity to break the game? The bad situation in Greece will not change in a short time. People are not rich, and horses are not fat. It is better to try check out opportunities abroad. If it fails, it will only lose some money. If it succeeds, if Greece can obtain an African colony rich in resources, it may not be able to hold the tail of the Second Industrial Revolution and grow stronger. At that time, the world was almost completely divided up. Only southern Africa was in a state of inconvenient transportation and was in a wild state. The indigenous Africans lived in the tribal era and were too backward. The cheap raw materials and commodities that the imperialist countries desperately needed were dumped in the market, and it could not provide them. Only Britain and France established several strongholds in southern Africa due to colonial activities and overseas trade, such as the Cape Town colony. So there are still large blank lands in the interior of southern Africa, such as the Congo River basin. Then, in a river with such a large flow of water as the Congo River, why does no one travel up the river by boat for commercial and adventure activities? The reason is also very simple. The lower reaches of the Congo River flow smoothly and the river is wide. It flows into the Atlantic Ocean from the west coast of Africa. However, if you sail inland along the river for about tens of kilometers, near Matadi, you will encounter the waterfall area in the lower reaches of the Congo River. There is a series of waterfalls that hinder people from upstream. With a veil of mystery, her true face is still unknown. In 1816, after the Napoleonic Wars, the Geographical Society of London was surprised that 3 centuries after the estuary of the Congo River had been discovered, there was still so little information about the river, so they commissioned Admiral Tucker to take the sailing ship Congo is responsible for exploring whether the Niger River and the Congo River are connected. This expedition was a huge disaster. They were stopped by the waterfall and could only cross the waterfall area on foot. The 65-person expedition team, including several experts and scholars, died one after another. In the next half-century, no scientific expedition dared to venture to the Congo River again. A series of waterfalls on the Congo River has greatly reduced people's interest in this area. No matter how rich the resources of the Congo River basin are, the transportation is inconvenient, and the water transportation is not accessible. If it cannot be transported, it is meaningless. Unless a country decides to spend huge sums of money on railways in the Congo River basin, bypassing the waterfalls of the Congo River and other tributaries of the Congo River. This is almost impossible until the data and geographical information of scientific expeditions are not available to understand the resource status of Congo. In the original time and space, the commodities produced in the early days of the Congo River basin were rubber and ivory. With these two commodities, the huge investment in railway construction would have to wait until the year of the monkey to make money. In the original time and space, King Leopold II of Belgium was in charge of this role, but after Leopold II in this time and space asked a geographer, read www.uuganshu.com did not make up their minds. It is precisely because the development of the Congo River basin requires a lot of investment, and the specific conditions such as geography, society, and natural resources are still unclear. As a result, no other countries have shown much interest so far. After Constantine knew about this situation, he told George I his thoughts. After listening to Constantine's reasons, George I also felt that there was a possibility of success. This possibility depends on two conditions. It is difficult for the First Congo region to develop and gain profits. Colonial powers such as Britain and France have vast colonies. Instead of investing money in the Congo River basin, which is hot and rainy, and the return risk is relatively high, it is better to invest in other places with higher returns and lower risks, such as South Africa in the United Kingdom. France, Vietnam, much more beneficial than the Congo River basin. This point determines that Britain and France will not stalk and entangle desperately in the Congo region. The location of the second Congo River basin is important. Open the map and you will understand that the Congo River basin is located in the center of Africa. If a powerful country occupies this place and has a firm foothold, it will definitely attack everywhere, expand in Africa, and other countries that colonize the fringes of Africa are very passive. This determines that, whether Britain, France or Germany and Italy, these countries that have the will of colonial expansion, even if they have the idea of occupying the Congo basin, other countries will strongly oppose it. Combining these 2 points, it seems impossible for a country like Greece that is weak and can be controlled by them at will, but it is the most likely to get the Congo. After thinking about these 2 points, whether or not to bet heavily on Congo, there is only one decisive question left: is Congo worth betting heavily? Is the Congo River basin worth spending a lot of resources on? For European countries that have not yet understood the specific conditions of the Congo River basin, they must have doubts. This determines that European countries will not pay too much attention to the Congo River basin. But this question did not exist for Constantine. There are a large number of natural rubber forests growing in the Congo River basin. Rubber trees like high temperature, high humidity, calm wind, and fertile soil. They require an average annual temperature of 26 to 27 degrees Celsius, and they can grow and produce rubber normally within the range of 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. They are not cold resistant. Freezing damage occurs when the temperature is below 5 degrees Celsius. The annual average precipitation is required to be 1150250 mm, but it should not be planted in places with low humidity. It is suitable for the growth of deep, fertile, and moist, well-drained acidic sandy loam soil. Shallow roots, weak branches, poor adaptability to wind, easy to suffer from wind chill and reduce gum yield. These conditions are completely compatible with the Congo River basin. The Congo River basin is crossed by the equator and distributed in the north and south of the equator. High temperature and rain are the climatic characteristics of the Congo River basin. At the end of the 19th century, in the Second Industrial Revolution, the internal combustion engine was an epoch-making invention. The automobile industry developed rapidly. The main material of automobile tires was rubber. The rapid development of the automobile industry made rubber quickly become one of the important raw materials. Volume increased sharply. Speaking of which, the demise of the Qing government can still be related to rubber. In the late Qing dynasty, when the railway was built in Sichuan, and the Qing government was in financial difficulties, the people of Sichuan spontaneously raised funds and sold railway stocks. As a result, after waiting for 2 or 3 years, there was no news of the railway. When the Qing government saw it, "It's okay, don't build it. I can't expect you to do anything. I'll use the foreign mortgage loan to build the railway." When the people of Sichuan heard the news, the public sentiment was turbulent. The Qing government did this, and the railway stocks bought by the people were worthless and went to waste. There were riots everywhere. After the Wuhan revolutionaries heard the news, the uprising responded and the Qing government died. Under certain historical conditions in the late Qing dynasty, the people were very sensitive to borrowing from foreign countries to build railways, which almost amounted to losing their power and humiliating the country. Because foreigners build railways, they often also require the right to garrison troops along the railway, the right to develop mineral resources, and other rights. In fact, the Qing government was also a little wronged, because the money raised by the Sichuan Railway was catching up with the rubber stock frenzy at the time. The major shareholders were carrying money from the people, embezzling money and using the money to fry rubber stocks. As a result, the rubber stocks plummeted. The silver was lost. Naturally, the railway could not be repaired without money, and the management could not contain the fire. It has been delayed for 2 or 3 years. Whenever people inquired, they would prevaricate as they are exploring the route. What should I do? When the major shareholders were at a loss, the Qing government announced that the Sichuan Railway would be reclaimed by the state and borrowed from foreign powers to build it. As for the money raised by the poor and deceived people later, what happened to it? It was a bad debt, and it was over. The rubber boom at the end of the 19th century is evident. Not to mention other things, just the rubber planting industry has a lot to do in Congo. In addition, there are a huge number of African elephants in the Congo River Basin, where they live and reproduce, and the ivory carvings are white and delicate. Animal protectionists don't scold me, I didn't say it, I didn't do it, and I didn't kill it. Loved by nobles and merchants, such as folding fans with ivory hollowed-out skeletons, jewelry boxes carved from ivory, and pianos with ivory keys. According to the statistics of later generations, there were several million elephants living in Gang Kingdom at the end of the 19th century. In addition to rubber and ivory, Africa is blessed with abundant metal deposits. The later Democratic Republic of Congo has the names of World Raw Material Warehouse, Central African Gem and Geological Miracle. Congo's copper mines account for 15% of the world's total copper mine reserves, and just Katanga province alone accounts for 7%. One of the main features of the Second Industrial Revolution is electrification. With electricity in the production and life of human society, a large number of applications need to use a large amount of copper wire, and the demand for copper in Europe is growing rapidly. In addition to the propellers of ships, bullets and shells, and even coins. Congo's copper mines not only have high reserves, but also have high grades of copper ore. There are several million tons of copper mines with a copper content of 30%. What is the concept of 30%? You must know that in later generations, copper reserves of 2% in China can be said to be a bonanza. This is not because Huaxia copper reserves are low, but entirely because of the long development history and large scale of Huaxia copper mine. In most of the history of China, copper was synonymous with money, and copper coins were used on a large scale in all dynasties of China. In the impression of later generations, influenced by unscrupulous film and television works, ancient people seem to use silver as currency, but the concept of copper coins is weak. In fact, it was quite late in China to use silver as currency on a large scale. Before the Ming dynasty, copper coins were used in large quantities. After the Ming dynasty, because the Spanish colonists discovered a large number of silver mines in the Americas. The Spanish treasure ships, carrying silver and other American specialties, departed from Chile and Peru, crossed the South Pacific by wind and waves, and came to the Philippines. The Philippines was Spanish colony, and traded with Ming Sea merchants. The Spanish colonists purchased large quantities of silk, tea, and porcelain from China, and merchants in the coastal areas of Jiangsu and Zhejiang and Guangdong and Fujian made a fortune. Through transactions, a large amount of silver flowed into the Ming dynasty, which directly changed the Chinese people's concept that money is copper. From this, the first generation of local tyrants in China, was born. The wealthy rich owners who made a lot of money because of sea trade could not get in. They were worried that future generations would ruin their family business, so they melted the silver into silver lumps, and then buried in the cellar. The soil is not soil, the real soil, is it proud or not? How proud? UU reading www.uugonshu.com. However, due to the high value of the precious metal silver, it was actually only used in large-scale trade. At that time, the common people used copper coins in large quantities. Just like in the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of people came into contact with $1, 5 cents, and 100 yuan bills. So a lot of copper was consumed in China. Therefore, the copper in the Congo River Basin is of great significance to Greece. The diamond reserves in the Kasai area are huge, and the later Gang Kingdom is the most important producer of industrial diamonds in the world. As for the gold in Eastern Province, according to later estimates, the amount of gold mined in the Congo Kingdom reaches tens of thousands of kilograms. The content of uranium ore is also very rich. Yes, it is the uranium used in the atomic bomb. During World War II, the Americans spent a lot of time trying to obtain the uranium ore from the Republic of Congo. As for other metals, whether they are rare metals, lead, manganese, zinc, tin, tungsten, lithium, platinum, palladium, etc., don't ask what metals are in the country, just ask what metals there are in the country. Congo is not only rich in metal resources, but also in forest resources. The main vegetation in Congo can be roughly divided into two types, forest and savanna. Almost 48% of the entire area of the Congo River Basin is covered by forests. The area of tropical rainforest in the Congo region is second only to the Amazon tropical forest in South America, and is called the second lung of the earth. There are 25 kinds of precious woods in the forest, such as ebony, mahogany, ash wood, rosewood and yellow lacquer wood. What kind of mahogany furniture? That's not a problem. In addition, tropical crops such as cocoa, sugarcane, and cotton can also be grown. Cotton can be used in the textile industry and cocoa can be used in chocolate. Congo's hot, rainy, and high-temperature climate is also very suitable for growing sugarcane. Sugarcane can be used to make sugar, and its economic value is huge. Constantine, you will go to Piraeus port to meet Mr. Stanley today. Remember to be more enthusiastic, he is a hero now. George I raised his head and said to Constantine. The port of Piraeus is the outer port of Athens, the capital of Greece, and the largest port in Greece. Okay, Nina, tell steward Capet, let him prepare the carriage, and say we are going to the port of Piraeus. Constantine turned to Nina who was standing behind him. Nina took the order and turned to leave. Constantine took the last bite of bread, stood up and said to Queen Olga and King George, then I'll go. After speaking, he slowly took 2 steps back and turned to leave the restaurant. In the dining room, Queen Olga looked at the figure of Constantine leaving, and said to George faintly, I'm just worried that if Constantine's plan fails, it will be a huge blow. He is no longer a child. He should experience some things himself. If the little lion has not been brutally tempered, he will not become a king. George I read the newspaper attentively, and said without raising his head. Constantine came to the yard and saw a carriage parked on the gravel road in the yard from a distance. The driver was sitting high in the driver's seat in front of the carriage, with a wide field of vision, a whip in his hand, and 2 purplish-red horses shishi. Shaking his head and sneezing, 4 oil lamps were placed on the 4 corners of the carriage, 4 well-armed knights were distributed in front and back, and Butler Capet was standing in front of the car door. "Your Excellency, the carriage is ready." Wearing a black tuxedo and a white shirt with a bow made of blue silk, Capet opened the carriage door. "Uncle Capet, you're still so polite." Constantine was very familiar with Capet. As long as he can remember, Capet has been a housekeeper in the royal family. "Etiquette can't be broken, Your Excellency," Butler Cape replied with a smile. When Constantine saw this, he didn't insist any more. He raised his legs and stepped into the front seat of the carriage, only to find Nina, who was wearing a long blue silk dress, also sitting inside. "You?" Constantine pointed at Nina in surprise, just as he was about to speak, but saw Nina put her finger in front of her mouth shhh, winked at Constantine with a wink, and showed a pleading expression on her face. "Look!" Immediately, Constantine reacted. He turned around and looked behind him. There was nothing unusual. He closed the car door with his left hand and said in a controlled voice, "Let's go." Butler Capet came to the driver, raised his head and said to the driver sitting high in the driver's seat, "Kafka, be careful on the road." The coachman gave you a reassuring expression, threw an empty whip, and with a slap sound, the 4 knights heard the signal and immediately turned on their horses. With a sound, the convoy slowly drove towards the iron fence gate of the manor. After the gate was opened by the guard, the convoy slowly passed through. Nina in the carriage let out a long breath, hummed an unknown song, leaned forward, put her head in front of the car window, pulled the window cloth with her left hand, and looked at the scenery outside. Taitoi Palace is located in the deep forest in the north of Athens. On both sides of the road leading to Athens, tall and dense forests cross paths. The rising sun occasionally passes through the treetops and shines into the carriage. The sound broke the silence of the forest, and several birds flew away, flapping their wings and flying away. Looking at Nina, who was looking at the scenery outside curiously, Constantine said warmly, "Nina, have you ever thought about a life outside the palace?" "Yes, will life outside the palace be very free?" Nina continued to look at the scenery outside the window without turning her head. Nina is 17 years old. Under the guidance of her previous tutor, she has completed her pre-university courses. Nina is so smart that the tutor who was originally invited by Constantine didn't mind taking Nina as an extra student. Queen Olga always compared the results of the two and made fun of the gentleman. Tantan. "Nina, do you want to study at the University of Athens?" Nina doesn't like palace life. She is actually a lively and cheerful girl. The royal palace is full of red tape and strict rules. Nina's character is out of tune with the royal life. Although Nina was very smart and adapted to court life well, from the bottom of her heart, Constantine knew that Nina didn't like it. He hoped that Nina could become an independent woman who was knowledgeable and assertive. If not, Constantine could not rest assured, and let Nina, a playmate who grew up with her since childhood, adapt to the complex and exciting external world. When I think of my mother, Queen Olga's personal maid, Miss Avrora, who was dowry from Russia, with a gloomy face all day long, and then look at Nina, who is in the best years of her life and is in full bloom, although a little reluctant, he still hardened his heart and said his plan. Life in the palace is monotonous and boring. Some of the male and female servants entered the palace since childhood to learn etiquette and literacy. They cannot fall in love in the royal palace. They are all in charge of the necessities of life. They have lived in the palace for a long time. Yuyuganshu.com will be released from the palace, and there are often people who cannot adapt to life outside the palace and request to return to the palace. They have adapted to the life in the palace and are used to being told what work they should do every day, because they have not been in contact for many years, and their families have been estranged. Miss Avrora, she is 50 years old this year and has not married yet, so she called him Miss. She couldn't adapt to the ordinary married life, and she didn't plan to get married again. She is the steward of the maid in the palace, and the male waiter is managed by the butler Capet. Constantine didn't want his playmate, Nina, to meet the same fate as Miss Avrola and live like a withered wood for the rest of his life. When Nina heard Constantine's words, she immediately turned her head, looked at Constantine in surprise, and said, I haven't made up my mind yet. You're very smart, it's a pity not to go to university, and you don't want to stay in the palace all your life. Constantine looked at her with pity. Nina was an orphan. After she was born, she was sent to the church. She was sent to the palace since she was a child. She followed Queen Olga and was raised by Miss Avrora. Although Miss Avrola has a straight face all day, she has a very close relationship with Nina, and she treats Nina like her own daughter. After you go back today, discuss it with Miss Avrola, Constantine advised. Nina nodded hesitantly, as if considering Constantine's proposal. There was silence in the carriage for a while, and both of them were thinking about their own thoughts. How much money does the Congo expedition need to have a result? It's really annoying. The carriage gradually entered the port area, and the environment became more and more noisy. The long whistle of woo-woo was heard in the distance. It seemed that the port of Piraeus was approaching. I don't know what good news for Stanley. As the carriage drove into the bustling area of the port, there were more and more two-story Greek-style buildings on both sides of the road, and there were more and more carriages on the flagstone road, silently keeping a distance from the flamboyant royal motorcade. The convoy stopped in front of a hotel with a garden turntable surrounded by bricks and stones. The doorman in a red suit hurriedly trotted from the front of the hotel to the door of the car, opened the door, leaned forward, and said with a bowed body, "Welcome, Your Excellency, what can I do for you?" "I am going to receive a distinguished guest at your hotel today and prepare a seat for me," Constantine said. "Are you waiting here to bring guests?" The doorman said with a smile. "Yes, then let me show you the way, Your Excellency." Okay. After speaking, the doorman pulled the door of the car with both hands and stood aside. When Constantine and Nina got out of the carriage, they trotted to the front and stretched out their right hand in an inviting gesture. Nina wrapped her arms around Constantine's arms and looked at the scene in the hotel curiously. When he came to the front desk, a middle-aged man in a black uniform trotted over with sweat on his forehead, and took over the position of the doorman. The doorman stuck his head and whispered a few words in front of the middle-aged man's ear. Afterwards, the middle-aged man bowed and said, "Welcome to our hotel. I am the front desk manager of the hotel. You can ask me if you have any requirements. Do you need us to send a carriage to the pier to welcome your distinguished guests here?" "Okay, it's a gentleman named Stanley, who is scheduled to take the cruise from London to Piraeus this morning," Constantine ordered. During the conversation, the manager led Constantine and his party to a box, opened the doors of the two boxes and said, "Your Excellency, this is the best box in our hotel. Sitting in this box, you can enjoy the sun, the beautiful scenery of the coast and the busy scene of the pier." He opened the black silk curtains in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the box with a clatter, and then opened the window. In the distance on the sea, seagulls flying and ships coming and going with long whistle woo-woo, the sea breeze with a fishy smell blew in, wrapped in curtains and squeaked. Curious baby Nina ran to the window, leaned out from the window, waved her hands excitedly towards the distant shore, and shouted loudly. After the manager said, he carefully looked at Constantine's expression and saw that there was no impatient expression on his face, so he let out a sigh of relief. Constantine looked around for a while. The furnishings in the box were not very gorgeous, but they were better than clumsy. In front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, there were two brown sofas surrounding a reception table. He was satisfied and nodded to the manager. The manager turned and left, and the four knights were divided into two columns to guard in front of the box door. Then the manager turned around and left. Constantine sat on the sofa, quietly waiting for Stanley's arrival, thinking about Stanley in his mind. Stanley became famous in the search for British explorer and missionary David Livingstone. In 1868, Stanley accepted the commission of the Paris newspaper to find Mr. David Livingstone, who had lost contact with the British in Central Africa. At that time, the latter had been missing for 2 years. Is David Livingstone still alive? At that time, public opinion in European and American countries was very concerned. In 1871, Stanley's expedition came to Zanzibar on the east coast of Africa, the coast of the Indian Ocean. The expedition set off from the coast of what is now Tanzania, and after a long journey of 8 months, finally found Livingstone in Ujiji on the shore of Lake Tanganyika. Stanley and Livingstone's encounter began with a brief question well known in the history of exploration. Stanley stepped forward into a clearing in the jungle where Livingstone was sitting. Stanley held out his hand and said, "You're Dr. Livingstone, I suppose." After finding Livingstone, Stanley kept secret and wrote a book, How I Found Livingstone in the UK, taking the opportunity to hype himself. This book was a hit. After Livingstone died in 1873, Stanley declared himself Livingstone's successor. In 1877, Stanley successfully reached the estuary of the Atlantic Ocean and became the first European to complete the whole line from the source of the Congo River, the coast of the Indian Ocean in Africa, to the mouth of the sea, the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Later, he wrote a book through the African continent, which recorded the expedition in detail. Undoubtedly, this book detailing southern Africa caused a stir. From Stanley's past deeds, it is not difficult to find that this is a person who can keenly seize opportunities and is quite scheming and wise. No wonder it stands out from the crowd of adventurers. This series of events also attracted the attention of George I and Constantine. Constantine believed that Mr. Stanley, a veteran who has been engaged in African exploration for a long time, must be very familiar with the geography and humanities of Africa and is the best choice for implementing the African plan. At the insistence of Constantine, King George I ordered the Greek ambassador to the UK to contact the renowned African adventure expert, and bought Stanley V for 10,000 francs before the Belgian king, who also had ambitions for Africa. Time of year. At that time, a worker who worked hard for a year received a salary of about 3,050 francs. There is no doubt that 10,000 francs is a generous reward for an individual. They reached an agreement. According to the contract, Stanley worked for George and Constantine in Congo for 5 years, without the prior consent of the two, not to announce any news, and not to hold any report meeting. From 1879 to the present, in 1882, Stanley was implementing this plan. With the large sum of money given by Constantine, Stanley recruited a group of outlaws from Europe, promised generous rewards, and went to Africa in a mighty way. After almost 4 years, Constantine needed a result. Constantine, who was contemplating, suddenly heard footsteps in front of the door. It seemed that a guest was coming. With a creak, the door was opened. One was wearing a beige suit and a yellow bowler hat. Bronze skin leaked from his face and the collar of his shirt. His eyes were piercing, and he had 2 fluffy mustaches on his mouth. A man in his 40s who was in his prime, with a red suitcase in his left hand and a cane in his right hand, walked in. A fierce breath came on coming. Speaking of which, this is the first time the two have met. Before that, the two had only communicated through letters and telegrams. Constantine stood up and extended his right hand to Stanley. Stanley put the suitcase in his hand on the ground and shook hands with each other. "Welcome to Greece, Mr. Stanley," Constantine greeted, respecting this key figure in the realization of the African plan. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Excellency," Stanley replied. Constantine's title was the Duke of Sparta. Yes, he was the Spartan warrior who advocated force and agile folk customs, the earliest city-state of Athens, Greece, and was full of tendons. This habit has been passed down from the United Kingdom, similar to the fact that the Crown Prince of the United Kingdom generally holds the title of Prince of Wales. To be honest, for a ruthless man like Stanley, who was born in the bottom of the United Kingdom and put his life on his belt in order to succeed in his career, he really doesn't think much of a man like Constantine who was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. People suffering from civil misery. As long as I think about how much suffering I have suffered, how many crimes I have suffered, how many times my life has been endangered in Africa, which is savage, ignorant, and uncivilized, I need to give my life to the cause of struggle, and the guy in front of me is born with everything. I got it, and I can't reach it in my life. Thinking of this, Stanley felt indignant. The two sat opposite each other across the reception table. "Mr. Stanley, can you tell me something interesting about Africa?" Constantine said. Hearing these words, Stanley looked at the young duke in front of him, thinking to himself, he seems to be a child who likes strange things in a foreign country. "Okay," Stanley said, glancing at Nina by the window. "He's my maid, Nina, it doesn't matter." Constantine saw Stanley's actions. "Okay, let's talk about what I saw in Africa. Our expedition team bought some unsaleable cotton cloth from London that had been backlogged for many years, as well as some clothes that were pressed in the warehouse, or simply some clothes that were thrown away. It can be said that in any country in Europe, those things cannot be sold, and the cotton cloth is not so much a cotton cloth as it is white clay and paste," Stanley said. "But what can cotton have to do with white clay and paste?" "Obviously, African stories are more attractive than the coastal scenery outside the window," Nina asked curiously. "A beautiful and lovely lady like you really doesn't know the way inside. Those profiteers will rack their brains to cut costs and increase profits. How to use very little cotton thread to weave cotton cloth that feels particularly thick. The secret is to hang the paste. The woven cotton cloth is passed through the paste. Some profiteers directly hang the paste with white clay mud. The cotton cloth treated in this way is thick and bright to the touch." Seeing that young and beautiful girls also like to listen to stories, Stanley is more interested in telling them. "This kind of cotton can't deceive people, can it? Isn't it exposed after one wash?" Nina was even more curious. "Yet, whoever buys this kind of inferior cloth, as long as he takes it home and washes it once, it will shrink, and it will no longer be as thick and bright as before." "Do Africans also buy those ragged clothes?" Nina looked in disbelief. "Haha, how come no one buys it? Do you know which natives are and what do they usually wear?" Stanley said that he was even happier here. What to wear? It should be animal skins. Since they are called natives, they are ignorant and will definitely not be able to make clothes, Nina replied. No, the temperature in the Ganges River Basin stays at 25 to 40 degrees all year round. Where can you wear animal skins? It will be hot to death. They wear some clothes made of hay and leaves. Guess what? Stanley seemed to be getting happier. Leaves are woven into clothes. Nina's eyes widened in disbelief. Constantine nodded thoughtfully. It seems that Africans also have purchasing power. But Mr. Stanley, there's one thing I don't quite understand. The goods you brought, let's try to calculate the goods. What do the Africans use to buy them? I mean, they don't have pounds or francs. Come and pay the bill. Constantine asked. It seems that he did not expect Constantine to ask such a direct question, and Stanley was a little surprised. Of course they don't have sterling francs, but they still have their own simple currency, a copper rod, which the locals use for trading currency. Of course, we occasionally trade some food, such as cassava, bananas, and I also get some ivory at times, Stanley explained. So it seems that the copper mines of Ganges are indeed rich? Constantine asked. I'm afraid it's not just the copper mines that are rich in reserves. There are elephants everywhere. If the ivory merchants saw it, they would definitely go crazy. When the local people saw us accepting ivory, they turned around and took out a lot of ivory to trade. According to my guess, I'm afraid they took it from a dead elephant, Stanley replied. In the Congo River Basin, the most popular thing is that we bring knives from Europe. In order to get a sharp European steel knife, they don't hesitate to exchange their entire net worth, Stanley said proudly. It can be seen that this guy has made a lot of extra money. In the past 2 or 3 years, I am afraid that the money he earned from those Africans may not be as good as what Constantine paid him. And, in Kinshasa, our home base, where the Congolese have a quirk that, in order to get a European fashion, they would rather go hungry, lay hands on us, work, just to wear clothes from civilized Europe, especially the clothes in Paris, they do everything they can for a bright and beautiful dress. What's even weirder is that those people are wearing European fashion that they have tried their best to show off in public, and the Africans around them will use envy, looking at them jealously. Honestly, I can't understand their show-off mentality, Stanley said. Really? Spending all of your fortune just for a luxury item? Where can someone be so stupid? Nina's eyes widened in disbelief. It's a pity that you can't go to Africa. The world is huge and full of wonders, not only luxury goods. Those tribal chiefs, after seeing us hunting with rifles, were all stunned and often asked our expedition members if they could sell them some rifle. If you want something to trade, we will sell it, Stanley said with pride. It seems that African adventures are indeed profitable. It is strange that so many people rush to Europe. It turns out that the adventure itself can make a fortune. It seems that Mr. Stanley must have made a lot of money from Africans, right? Even Constantine had a taste for it. With Lao Tzu's huge sponsorship, he made a lot of money from his own extra money. This is not a waste of money. What? Stanley seemed to see what Constantine was thinking, and quickly said, it's not all pleasant memories. After all, in the uncivilized southern African continent, there are also many tribes, not so easy to talk. Not all Africans have. There is the concept of trading, and there are malicious intent, robbery, Stanley explained. Not only that, people on the expedition often get sick and die. You also know the climate of the Congo River Basin, hot, high temperature and rainy, malaria, dysentery, and annoying mosquitoes. In Africa, where there is little medical treatment, almost everyone talk about a discoloration, Stanley said here, feeling a little down. Your Excellency, most Africans are very optimistic and always have a smile on their faces. I think this is probably their natural character. In the Congo River Basin, plants are evergreen throughout the year, and there is no shortage of food throughout the year. For them, it is a feeling that they have never experienced, and I think they probably will not have this word in their vocabulary. Although compared to Europe, they are uncivilized and do not have the advanced science and technology as us, but they live very happy, self-sufficient, and laugh a lot. Sometimes I even think, what's wrong with living as mediocre and ignorant as they are? On the contrary, we, Europeans who claim to be civilized and wise, rack our brains. Satisfy your own desires, be busy, and run around all day. Said here, Stanley's mood was even lower. Hearing Stanley's words, the room was quiet for a while. No matter who, after learning that he did something bad, as long as he didn't lose his conscience, he would easily feel guilty. The sudden intrusion of Europeans broke the peaceful life of the local indigenous people for thousands of years. Mr. Stanley, you don't have to be so passive, this is probably the price you have to pay for civilization. Constantine comforted. The price that must be paid to go to civilization. Nina and Stanley were a little puzzled when they heard Constantine's words. It is recorded in the Bible that God created the ancestors of mankind, Adam and Eve. He built a paradise for them in a place called Eden. The garden was filled with wonderful flowers and fruits, and all kinds of trees grew there. The ground was sprinkled with gold, pearls, and onyx. A rich river flowed through the garden and nourished the land. By the gift of God, the estate was full of grain and fruit, said Constantine. Nina and Stanley listened attentively to Constantine's narration. There is nothing unusual about this story. As long as most Christians know this story, there must be more to it. Eve and Adam lived happily in the manor, enjoying all kinds of harvests in the garden, wandering freely, unfettered, and never knowing what troubles were. Until one day, the two people who were tempted ate the forbidden fruit in the garden and were offended God, and was driven out of the Garden of Eden. The two listened to Constantine's words, contacted the situation of the African natives before, and fell into contemplation. Since then, they have entered Paradise Lost. People have to work to get food for their stomachs. They work hard, only for food to live on. They can't be liberated until they enter the ground. Constantine said. Maybe this is the price that must be paid for entering civilization. The beginning of civilization was a disaster that violated human nature. Countless people have fantasized about having such a paradise without sweating their backs and working the land. If you work in the middle, you can get any food, you can travel at ease, and you won't have troubles. Constantine himself felt deeply touched by this. Perhaps now is the time for the people of southern Africa to enter Paradise Lost. Of course, these are biblical stories and don't have to be taken too seriously. And we are far from the snake that lured Africans into eating the forbidden fruit, Ave Shadang, lured by snakes. You know where the Portuguese started the slave trade in the 16th century, where the local chiefs fought with Portuguese muskets and used captives to trade goods with the Portuguese, Constantine said. What's more, there is no paradise there. Before the Portuguese came, their tribes were not fighting for hegemony, such as the Kingdom of Congo, the Kingdom of Cuba, all feudal regimes established by the indigenous people of the Congo River in Africa, etc., so we don't have to burden ourselves with such a heavy moral burden, Constantine seemed to console himself. Besides, the notorious slave trade is now rarely engaged by the Portuguese, but the Arabs are rampant, Constantine said. Indeed, when it comes to the slave trade, people first think of the evil European colonists who sold black people to the plantations in the Americas as laborers for the sake of profit. Those slave owners in the Americas brutally oppressed and abused their slaves. Indeed, this is a historical fact, but it is only a partial fact. In the uneven interest chain of the slave trade, which is monstrous and violates human relations, which manor and slave owners in the Americas are the downstream of this interest chain. European colonists were responsible for buying black slaves, then transporting them to the Americas and sending them to slave owners, playing an intermediary role in this chain of interests. So who is playing the upstream role in this chain of interests? That is, who personally captured black people, looted black villages, slaughtered black people who dared to resist, turned black women and children into slaves, and then sold them to European colonists as intermediaries? Isn't this a louse on a bald head, an obvious thing? Not the slaves captured by the European colonists. It is true that some of them were captured by the European colonists themselves, but only a small part of them. Most of the black people who were trafficked were actually bought from others. The upper reaches of the chain of interests, that is, those who personally arrest slaves and sell them, and those who play this role are not only the European colonizers themselves. In the early days of the Portuguese era of great voyages, some people once caught slaves, but it was only a small amount, for a very short period of time. Although the Portuguese is a colonial power, its national strength has not been strong. He mainly relies on trade to make money, unlike the Netherlands, Britain, and France, which are not only powerful in trade but also in industry. Portugal's strength has always been weak and its population is sparse. Therefore, the Portuguese are unable to capture a large number of slaves in Africa. The Portuguese national strength is weak, so they are more inclined to obtain slaves through trade, such as muskets, glass, or some other European goods. During the main period of the slave trade, European slaves were purchased from the Arab kingdoms or Bantu kingdoms on the coast of Africa, rather than the Europeans themselves. Most of the slave providers are forgotten by the world. They are Arabs. Until the end of the 19th century, European colonists only set up strongholds on both sides of the coast of Africa or some navigable rivers to facilitate trade. Their control over Africa is far from being as strong as the colonial map of Africa shows, and even a large part of the territory is only assigned to a certain European politician on the map of Europe. Countries, but the overlord countries may not have actually controlled most of the colonies from beginning to end, they just dispatched officials to manage certain key areas, such as mining areas, and some areas suitable for growing commercial crops. In other words, Europeans are incapable of going deep into the African interior, capturing black people on a large scale and selling them as slaves. After all, there is no railway in Africa, and the world has not invented airplanes and automobiles, which makes Europeans powerless to arrest black slaves on a large scale. In addition, the white people in Europe are not suitable for the climate of Africa. At that time, there were no effective drugs for many diseases. For example, the invention of artemisinin to treat malaria happened after World War II. Cinchona was used to treat malaria before. The bark has serious side effects. Everyone knows that European whites, in the era of monstrous colonialism, carried out evil black slave trade operations, and African blacks were captured in large numbers all over the world to serve as lowly laborers. But few people have paid attention to the 1,000-year-old, enduring slave trade history of the Arabs. And the Arab world in the Middle East has never reflected on its own history of slave trade. This is different from the European Caucasian. Until the 21st century, the black Africa south of the Sahara Desert and the white Africa north of the desert have no relationship. Because the Arab countries are deaf and dumb about their history of engaging in mass trafficking of blacks. The Arabs in the Middle East are the first organized and large-scale African slave trade in human history. The history of slave trade is far earlier than the Western slave trade. By the way, speaking of slave traders, Arab slave traders in the Congo River Basin, are they harassing frequently? Constantine said to Stanley. Why is it not frequent? Europeans go to Africa just to seek money. These Arabs are really vicious. They set off from the east coast of Africa, especially Zanzibar Island, which is the base camp of their Arab slave traders. They often explore with us. The mercenaries of the team clashed and exchanged fire. When these came to the villages of the African indigenous people, as long as they dared to resist, they would kill them all, then kidnap the young children, and serve as slaves with docile women, even the missionaries of the Catholic Church. I can't stand it anymore. At this point, Stanley seemed to think of something interesting and paused. If one day, you go to southern Africa and see many Christians, don't be surprised. Since the age of voyages, there have been missionaries from Europe going to southern Africa one after another. You will never guess that their first missionary trick, haha, Stanley laughed. Missionary methods? Nina asked in confusion. What other methods can missionaries have? A priest preaches the Bible to those who worship God. No, Stanley was very proud of Nina's failure to guess correctly, and deliberately made fun of the little girl. Their initial missionary method was to kidnap local nobles or powerful people, and then preach to them about God until they convert. God, let them go, isn't it fun, you say? Stanley said. There is still such a missionary. Nina's eyes widened in disbelief. By the way, just last year, an expedition led by the French Brazzaville planted the French flag in the northern part of the Congo River, now called Brazzaville. Kinshasa, plant the flag of the Council of the Congo, Stanley said cautiously, looking at Constantine. According to the original plan, in the north of the Congo River, Constantine personally informed Stanley, but this guy didn't care and let the French take the lead. Hey, Constantine sighed in his heart. Historically, the Kingdom of Gang, Brazzaville, was a colony of the French, but it still hasn't changed the situation. Of course, it could also be that Stanley judged the situation and did not dare to offend the French. Although the French were defeated by the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, they were still a foreign power that Greece could not provoke. How many strongholds and treaty agreements have your expedition built? Constantine asked. In various European countries, the basis for determining the ownership of colonies is the actual occupation or the agreement signed with the chief. The actual occupation is the business contact point established by the businessman. It's a mandate treaty. This is the basis for determining the ownership of a colony. For a small country like Greece, it may not be able to get a colony if it has this thing, but if it doesn't, it will definitely not get it. We went upstream along the Congo River as planned, setting up more than a dozen strongholds along the way, and signing more than 100 rights transfer treaties, Stanley replied. You need to speed up the progress. Countries are expanding rapidly to Africa. By the way, based on your experience in Africa for so many years, what do you think of the development prospects of the Congo River Basin? Stanley asked. After Stanley heard Constantine's question, he frowned and thought. If you're talking about development prospects and you mean making money, Your Excellency the Duke, probably won't be happy to hear it, Stanley said while touching his chin with his right hand. What does this mean? Stanley was nervous. He thought he could hear some encouraging words, but Stanley's words were more like pouring cold water. The Congo River Basin is densely covered and crisscrossed, not only the Congo River, but also many tributaries of the Congo River, with abundant rainfall and stable water flow, because the equator passes through the Congo River Basin. During the dry season, the north of the equator is the rainy season, and vice versa. The tributaries of the Congo River are distributed in the north and south of the equator. They take turns to inject abundant water into the downstream Congo River. From my experience, it has a very high water transport value, Stanley said. No matter what era, water transportation is the cheapest way of transportation. The waterways formed by the many tributaries of the Congo River are golden trade routes. According to you, this should be good news, right? Constantine asked inexplicably. You are right, but there is a premise that you need a huge upfront investment, and the railway from Matadi to Kinshasa is a hurdle that cannot be overcome, Stanley replied. From Matadi to Kinshasa, the railway is about 400 kilometers long. You can imagine how difficult it would be to build such a railway in Africa, far from the civilized world. No matter how difficult it is to build, the cost will be high. As for why Matadi went to Kinshasa, this is because after the ships caused by the waterfalls in the lower reaches of the Congo River reached Africa, reading www.uuganshu.com sailed inland along the Congo River as far as they could reach Matadi. The section from Matadi to Kinshasa is not navigable. Construction of a railway linking the vast network of waterways of the Congo River with the mouth of the navigable ship is an indispensable condition for the development of the Congo, continued Stanley. As for what resources Congo has, I'm not a professional scholar, and I don't know, but from the perspective of the civilization level of the local people, no matter what kind of treasure God buried in Congo, it's still buried in the ground intact, Stanley wrote. In other words, so far, I know that you and your father, His Majesty, have invested a lot of money, but with all due respect, it is not enough. You must find supporters, those who have a banker with a lot of capital, or some other dignitary. This is my sincere suggestion, Stein said, looking at Constantine. Stanley hoped that Constantine would succeed, because the balance of his remuneration had not been paid yet. That is to say, the initial investment is very expensive, but it is still very profitable. Constantine continued to ask, wanting to know the thoughts of this old African oiler. That's right. Oh, by the way, I also heard about an expedition from Tanzania recently, Stanley said. There are as many expeditions in Africa, sir, Constantine said disapprovingly. This one is different. His leader is Cameron, an Englishman. As for his patron, I have heard privately, Stanley said here, looking at Constantine, it is the King of Belgium, Leopold II. Hearing this name, Constantine's pupil shrank, and he secretly said, he's still here.